RealPlayer, the pioneer that became the internet's most hated software. In 1994, the World Wide Web was still a collection of static pages, text, and images that loaded pixel by pixel over dial-up connections. Video on the internet was essentially impossible. Downloading a single minute of footage could take hours. And that was if you had the patience to wait for the entire file to finish transferring before you could watch even a second of it. Then Rob Glazer, a former Microsoft executive, had a revolutionary idea that would change everything. His company, Progressive Networks, later renamed Real Networks, would create something called streaming media, the ability to watch video and listen to audio as it downloaded, without waiting for the entire file to complete. Their first product, RealAudio, launched in April 1995 and was followed by RealVideo in 1997, combined into the RealPlayer suite that would bring multimedia to the masses. For a brief, shining moment, Real Networks was the undisputed king of internet media, powering everyone from major news networks to garage bands trying to share their music with the world. But this is the story of how a genuine pioneer and legitimate game changer managed to squander every advantage they had, transforming from beloved innovator to universally despised bloatware that made users' computers slower, less secure, and filled with unwanted junk. This is how RealPlayer went from revolutionary breakthrough to internet cancer. Rob Glazer wasn't some random entrepreneur trying to strike it rich in the dot-com boom. He was Microsoft employee number 271, hired directly by Bill Gates himself, and had spent a decade working on multimedia projects at the software giant. When he left Microsoft in 1993 to found Progressive Networks, he had insider knowledge of where the technology was heading, and more importantly, what Microsoft wasn't prioritizing. Glazer recognized that the internet was going to become a multimedia platform, not just a glorified digital library, and he knew that whoever solved the streaming problem first would control a massive new market. His timing was perfect. Internet connections were getting faster, but still not fast enough for traditional file downloads, and websites were desperately looking for ways to incorporate rich media content that would keep visitors engaged. The technical challenge was enormous. How do you deliver video and audio content that starts playing immediately, maintains decent quality, and works reliably over inconsistent network connections that might slow down or hiccup at any moment? Glazer assembled a team of brilliant engineers who developed proprietary compression algorithms and streaming protocols that could adapt to varying bandwidth conditions in real time. When RealAudio launched in April 1995, it was genuinely magical. For the first time in internet history, you could click on a link and immediately hear music, news broadcasts, or live events streaming directly to your computer. Within weeks of launch, Progressive Networks had signed deals with major content providers including ABC, NPR, and record labels who suddenly saw the internet as a viable distribution platform. The early success of RealAudio was nothing short of phenomenal, and it validated Glazer's vision that streaming media would become the foundation of internet entertainment. By the end of 1995, RealAudio had been downloaded over 1 million times, making it one of the most popular software applications on the early web. Major news events like the 1995 baseball playoffs and breaking news stories were being broadcast live over the internet for the first time, and Progressive Networks was getting credit for ushering in a new era of digital media. The company went public in November 1997, raising $42 million and achieving a market capitalization that peaked at over $3 billion during the height of the dot-com bubble. Content creators flocked to the platform because Real Networks offered not just the player software, but also the server technology and content creation tools needed to deliver streaming media at scale. By 1999, Real Networks claimed that RealPlayer had been downloaded over 150 million times, making it more widely installed than many operating system components. The technology was so successful that it caught the attention of Microsoft, which began developing competing products like Windows Media Player, and Apple, which would later create QuickTime streaming capabilities. But Real Networks had a massive first-mover advantage and seemed positioned to dominate the streaming media market for decades to come. They had the technology, the market share, the content partnerships, and the financial resources to stay ahead of any competition. However, even during RealPlayer's golden years, there were warning signs that Real Networks was making decisions that prioritized short-term revenue over user experience. The free version of RealPlayer was deliberately crippled compared to the paid RealPlayer Plus, which cost $29.99 and offered features like the ability to record streaming audio and enhanced video quality. This wasn't unusual for software companies, but Real Networks took the strategy to an extreme by making the free version increasingly naggy and limited with each new release. Users were constantly bombarded with pop-up advertisements encouraging them to upgrade, and basic features like full-screen video playback were locked behind the paywall. Even worse, the installation process became a minefield of unwanted add-ons and software bundles that users had to carefully navigate to avoid cluttering their computers with toolbars, trial software, and promotional offers. The company also began collecting detailed usage data about what content users were watching and listening to, often without making the data collection policies clear during installation. By 2000, RealPlayer had gained a reputation among tech-savvy users as software that was useful, but came with significant strings attached. The program would often set itself as the default media player without asking, create desktop shortcuts that kept reappearing after deletion, and run background processes that consumed system resources even when the player wasn't actively being used. The real turning point came when Real Networks decided to transform RealPlayer from a simple media player into a comprehensive digital media hub, complete with online services, content stores, and social features that nobody had asked for. RealPlayer 10, released in 2004, was a bloated monstrosity that took forever to load, consumed massive amounts of system memory, and tried to do everything from playing media files to managing photo collections to burning CDs to providing news headlines. The installation file had grown from a few megabytes to over 20 megabytes, enormous by the standards of the time, and the software required frequent updates that seemed to add more unwanted features with each revision. Users began reporting that RealPlayer was slowing down their computers, causing crashes, and displaying advertising even when they weren't using the program. The company also made the controversial decision to integrate their Rhapsody Music subscription service directly into RealPlayer, constantly promoting paid content and subscription offers within the interface. But the most damaging change was Real Networks' adoption of increasingly aggressive advertising and data collection practices that made users feel like their media player was spying on them and treating them as products to be monetized rather than customers to be served. Tech support forums filled with complaints about RealPlayer's intrusive behavior, and computer technicians began recommending that users avoid installing it altogether. As RealPlayer became increasingly bloated and user-hostile, competitors emerged with cleaner, faster, and more user-friendly alternatives that quickly gained market share. Microsoft's Windows Media Player was included free with every copy of Windows and offered many of the same streaming capabilities without the advertising and bloatware. Apple's QuickTime Player was preferred by Mac users and handled high-quality video better than RealPlayer. But the most significant threat came from newer companies that understood users were tired of proprietary formats and aggressive software behavior. Adobe's Flash Player became the preferred platform for web video because it was lightweight, worked reliably across different browsers and operating systems, and didn't try to take over users' computers with unwanted features. VLC Media Player, developed as open-source software, gained a devoted following because it could play almost any media format without requiring codec downloads or software registration. Perhaps most damaging of all, the rise of YouTube in 2005 demonstrated that users preferred web-based media consumption that didn't require installing dedicated player software at all. Real Networks had spent years training users to associate streaming media with annoying software behavior, and when alternatives appeared that offered the same capabilities without the hassle, users abandoned RealPlayer in droves. By 2006, RealPlayer's market share had fallen from over 50% to less than 10%. And the decline was accelerating as word spread about better alternatives. The final nail in RealPlayer's coffin came when security researchers began discovering serious vulnerabilities in the software that could allow malicious websites to take control of users' computers. In 2005, security firm Secunia reported that RealPlayer contained multiple buffer overflow vulnerabilities that could be exploited by specially crafted media files to execute arbitrary code on victims' systems. Even worse, RealPlayer's automatic update mechanism and web browser integration created additional attack vectors that hackers could exploit to install malware or steal personal information. The software's habit of running background processes and maintaining internet connections made it an attractive target for cybercriminals who wanted persistent access to infected computers. Computer security experts began warning users to uninstall RealPlayer entirely rather than simply avoiding its use, because having it installed created security risks even when it wasn't running. Corporate IT departments started blocking RealPlayer installations on company computers, and antivirus companies began flagging certain versions of the software as potentially unwanted programs. The reputation damage was catastrophic. RealPlayer went from being seen as useful but annoying software to being actively dangerous to computer security. Real Networks was forced to release emergency security patches on a regular basis, but each update seemed to introduce new problems or additional bloatware that made users even more eager to find alternatives. Recognizing that their flagship product had become toxic, Real Networks attempted several desperate rebranding and redesign efforts to win back users who had abandoned the platform. In 2008, they released RealPlayer 11 with a completely redesigned interface and promises that they had eliminated the bloatware and intrusive behavior that users hated. The new version was indeed cleaner and faster than its immediate predecessors, but the damage to the brand was already done. Most users had moved on to other media players and associated the RealPlayer name with poor software practices. The company also tried to pivot toward mobile and cloud-based services, launching RealPlayer Cloud in 2013 as a way to sync media libraries across devices. But they were entering markets already dominated by companies like Apple, Google, and Spotify, who had learned from Real Networks' mistakes. Perhaps most tellingly, Real Networks began emphasizing their server and enterprise software products over consumer applications, effectively admitting that they had lost the battle for desktop media player market share. They continued releasing new versions of RealPlayer with improved features and better performance, but the user base never recovered from the exodus of the mid-2000s. By 2010, RealPlayer's market share had fallen below 2%, and most internet users under the age of 25 had never heard of the software that had once been essential for consuming online media. The decline of RealPlayer coincided with the rise of new streaming technologies and business models that made Real Networks' proprietary approach obsolete. Adobe Flash became the dominant platform for web video until HTML5 video standards eliminated the need for browser plugins entirely. Streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube built their own delivery technologies that worked seamlessly in web browsers without requiring users to install separate media player software. Music streaming evolved towards subscription services like Spotify and Apple Music that offered vast catalogs of content for monthly fees rather than requiring users to find and download individual streams. The entire concept of a standalone media player application began to seem antiquated as media consumption moved toward integrated web browsers, mobile apps, and smart TV interfaces that handled streaming automatically. Real Networks found themselves competing not just against better media players, but against a completely different paradigm where users expected seamless, invisible streaming that just worked without thinking about the underlying technology. Their expertise in compression algorithms and streaming protocols was still valuable, but primarily to enterprise customers and content delivery networks rather than individual consumers who had moved on to newer solutions. The story of RealPlayer's rise and fall offers crucial lessons about how technology companies can destroy their own success through poor decision-making and misaligned priorities. Real Networks genuinely revolutionized internet media and created technologies that laid the foundation for today's streaming economy. Their early work on adaptive bitrate streaming, real-time media delivery, and cross-platform compatibility was genuinely innovative and years ahead of the competition. But they made the fatal mistake of treating their users as revenue sources to be exploited rather than customers to be served, loading their software with advertising, bloatware, and intrusive behavior that drove away the very people who had made them successful. They prioritized short-term monetization strategies over long-term user satisfaction, assuming that their technological advantages would protect them from competition indefinitely. When better alternatives emerged, users had no loyalty to a company that had spent years making their computing experience worse in pursuit of additional revenue streams. The RealPlayer saga demonstrates how quickly market leadership can evaporate when companies lose sight of what made them valuable in the first place. Real Networks created streaming media, brought video to the early internet, and enabled countless innovations in digital entertainment. But they'll be remembered primarily as the company that turned essential software into digital cancer that users couldn't wait to remove from their computers.